Good morning, my lord.
Good morning, Miss van der Westhuizen. Yes, no. You have a witness for us this morning?
I do, my lord. We have Mr. Neville Prentice, who is the Senior Director of Service Development and Delivery for Skills Development, Scotland.
Thank you. Good morning, Miss Prentice.
Good morning.
My lord, we have an hour and 45 minutes available to us for Mr. Prentice. I'm not sure whether or not yet we'll need the whole time. We have a very comprehensive witness statement from Mr. Prentice, but I would propose to take the break at around the 1 hour mark, just in case. We may not need the full 45 minutes after that, but at least we have options.
At a time round about that time that you think is convenient, Miss Westerhuizen.
Thank you, my lord.
Now, when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Prentice, could you please confirm your full names?
It's Neville Andrew Russell Prentice.
And you gave a witness statement to the inquiry, my lord, for reference. That can be found at using WT0866.
You?
That's correct.
And you are Senior Director of Service Development and Delivery for Skills Development Scotland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've held that role since October 2014.
That's correct.
Could I please ask you just to outline briefly what that role entails, just in general terms, and then broadly during the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. So the role, as the name suggests, I'm responsible for the service design in Skills Development Scotland, and we're looking at trying to ensure that we support learners in Scotland, and that the learners can be young people in school or people that are in college, university, or apprenticeship programs to migrate through into the labour market. So my team looks at the service delivery, the design of the service delivery, and then we're then responsible for the delivery of the service to our customers. That's really in sort of three distinct parts. So careers advisors in schools, supporting young people in schools to make the right or to make informed careers information, advice and guidance decisions based on where they want to go in their next stage of their journey. We support, on behalf of Scottish Government, the apprenticeship delivery in Scotland. That's the design of the programmes and the delivery of the programmes. We use a lot of contractors, private training providers and public training providers to do the delivery of the apprenticeship programmes, and then we've got a large number of people that look at the careers intelligence, the labour market intelligence, making sure that we sort of design up and support programmes that lead people into opportunities in the labour market which are economically beneficial to Scotland, so increasing the value add that Scotland gets out of the skills and education system in Scotland.
Thank you, and I think you've touched on there, as well as your own role, on what Skills Development Scotland does. You're here to speak specifically about apprenticeships, but Skills Development Scotland does more than that, as you've just outlined.
Yeah.
It's the National Skills Agency, as I understand. Could you please just explain a little bit more about where it fits in and what its relationship is to the Scottish Government?
Yeah, so we're a government body, and we are shareholder is Scottish Government. They will give us a letter of guidance at the start of the year that guides us as to what our service delivery and their expectations of us are, and then we make sure that we deliver to those expectations. So they will be round about what we do in the careers advisors and in school, but on the apprenticeship programmes it's very much around the shape of the apprenticeship programmes. They will support us with our budget. Our budget supports the apprenticeship delivery in Scotland, so about just under £90 million a year goes into the apprenticeship delivery. They will give us an expectation about the number of apprenticeship starts that we will deliver on an annual basis, and that includes the foundation, modern and graduate apprenticeship starts. So they're very clear in their expectations as to what that's going to be. We then do a lot of value-added work with employers, etc., to make sure that the balance of where the starts go are in areas where ultimately where the employers need those starts to be.
Thank you. And we'll come on to discuss in a bit more detail those points that you've touched on there, including the relationship with the Scottish Government. Sure. and the direction you receive from them and what you do with your customers and other partners. We've heard a little bit in the course of these hearings about the different types of apprenticeships, and I understand that there are three main types: foundation apprenticeships, modern apprenticeships, and graduate apprenticeships. Could I ask you, please, just to spend a bit of time setting out, just giving an overview of what each of those is, and perhaps starting with foundation apprenticeships, if you could give an overview of the key features and approximate number of foundation apprenticeships that there are in Scotland, and then I'll take you to the others in turn.
Yeah, so foundation apprenticeships are programs that are delivered in the senior phase of school, so usually a young person in S5, S6 will undergo some work-based learning opportunities whilst continuing with their more normal curriculum. So it'll be done alongside the curriculum. They're generally 1 or 2 year programs, and they're tasters, if you like, as to what an apprenticeship program could be if you leave, when you leave school and go into a fully employed apprenticeship program like a modern or graduate level apprenticeship. Generally speaking, on an annual basis, there's opportunity for up to 5,000 starts a year. Typically, it's around 4,200 up to 4,600 that we've had in the last 5 or 6 years. So small numbers relative to the number of people that are in a cohort in school, but nevertheless an important number. And SDS has been responsible for building that curriculum, ensuring it's delivered. It's delivered in 2 ways. One through partnerships with local authorities, through private training providers, or partnerships with the colleges, local colleges, and they tend to be the training providers of choice for those foundation apprenticeships. So young people in school progressing through, a lot of them go on to modern apprenticeship programs. Some will go into back into college or into university. So that's the foundation apprenticeship.
So just to pause there, you mentioned it's apprenticeship might look like. Is that modern apprenticeships that they would go into, or would they also go into foundation apprenticeships potentially?
When you're in the school system, there's a tariff given to the qualification that you've achieved. So foundation apprenticeships have got the same equivalency as a national higher qualification would be, so that if a young person is doing a foundation apprenticeship, there's a number of progression routes that they can do. One of them would be a modern apprenticeship, but they can also go into university, and that foundation apprenticeship is part of the curriculum that's needed to be achieved to go into university. So, for instance, you might do 5 hires and go to university, but you might do 4 hires and a foundation apprenticeship and go to university. So SDS has spent a lot of time with partners and university partners particularly to make sure that a young person that's doing a foundation apprenticeship can go into that apprenticeship will qualify for entry into a Scottish university.
Thank you. And then if I could ask you, please, to outline or provide an overview of the key features and approximate numbers of modern apprenticeships in Scotland, which I understand is the largest cohort.
Yeah, by far the largest cohort and the more traditional cohort that we'd all be familiar with. So modern apprenticeships are very different from a foundation apprenticeship in that they're employed. The people on a modern apprenticeship are employed with employers. So there's got to be a need for an employer to take on a modern apprenticeship or a modern apprentice. So on an annual basis, there will be roughly 26,000 starts, modern apprenticeship starts. Any given time, there will be 39 to 40,000 apprentices on programme at any given time. And they are across a wide curriculum area. They can vary in length between 1 year and typically 4 years, and the consumption of training is done at the speed of the learner and the speed of the training provider and the need of the employer. They're all supported by an SDS contract with the training provider, but the state, if you like, or the training provider through SDS will pay for the training, and the employer will, generally speaking, pay for the wages, and they'll do some top-up training for the cost of delivering that training as well. The employer will do that.
Thank you. So the training provider is, for example, a college or...
There's a large number of private training providers delivering modern apprenticeship programs.
And is that, so that's the theoretical part of it, is that correct?
The training provider will do a lot of the facilitation of the apprentice on the program with the employer. A lot of them will do the recruitment or support the recruitment of the apprentice, making sure that they're fit for the program that the employer's wanting them to participate on. They'll also do a lot of pastoral care around the apprentice themselves. They will make sure that the employer is doing what they need to do to support the apprentice in the workplace, and then they will either directly themselves support the off-the-job training, or they'll do it via another training provider. Like some of it gets subcontracted back into colleges for off-the-job training. And then they will, a lot of them will do the certification of the actual verification that the apprenticeship has been undertaken and the evidence, portfolio of evidence of the apprentice has been achieved, and they'll do the signing off of that, and then the apprentice can complete their apprenticeship.
Thank you. And then finally, if we could have an outline or an overview, please, of the key features and approximate numbers of graduate apprenticeships in Scotland.
So again, graduate apprentices are employed. So there's got to be an employer that is employing the apprentice. The graduate apprenticeships, typically the training provider, I think all the training providers in Scotland are universities, and the learner will be employed by the employer and then go to the training establishment, the university, for off-the-job training, mixed delivery patterns as to how that training will take place. Sometimes it's a day a week, sometimes it's block release. That's very much depending on the framework and the training provider and the relationship with the employer. Much smaller numbers, 1,200 approximately starts a year and on a graduate apprenticeship. Typically 4-year programs, some of them are 3 years. There'll be recognised prior learning that will count to enable the learner not to have to do year 1, potentially just years 2, 3 and 4. Predominantly the learners tend to be younger, but you will have, they're open to all ages of people.
Thank you. I'll come on in due course to ask you about the role in the governance and delivery of apprenticeships, or SDS's role in that. But if we could ask you now to provide an overview of the groups that SDS supports or represents relevant to apprenticeships in Scotland, and in particular the key customer groups and the main partners and stakeholders. And you discuss this starting at paragraph 25 of your witness statement. But if we could start perhaps with the key customer groups and just provide an overview of the main ones, specifically in relation to or relevant to apprenticeships, please.
Yeah. So customer groups, starting with the employer on apprenticeships, the employers will be involved in all sectors in Scotland. So there's a heavy number of employers in the sort of engineering, technology, space, construction, manufacturing. And then you've also got a lot of employers in social care, health and social care, business services, etc. So it's really, the apprenticeship programs cover all the diverse sectors in Scotland. SDS does not deliver these things without a significant amount of partnership working. So we've talked about the role of training providers is absolutely crucial. The role of employers is absolutely crucial. The role of the learner is absolutely crucial into the apprenticeship programs. SDS's area of influence, if you like, would be making sure that the overall efficacy of the programme is delivered in the intent of what these apprenticeship programmes should be, but also we are responsible for the standards and the frameworks around which these things are delivered. So SDS, we've got a small team that looks at continuously improving the curriculum and making sure it's fit for purpose. We do a lot of work around the quality assurance and making sure that the quality of the employer and the training provider is fit for purpose for the apprentice. We also take a lot of feedback from all parts of the system to make sure that the programs are on track from a quality assurance point of view. And then we contract manage the system to make sure that if we've got areas of improvement, that we've got continuous improvement going into the overall system.
Thank you. So essentially the customer groups are industry or the business?
Very much so, yeah. Any employers typically in Scotland. I mean, we haven't mentioned hairdressers, automotive, that type of thing, but really any sector where you require a high degree of hands-on learning, training, apprenticeship programs, especially the modern apprenticeship programs, are very, that's where the employer base is from.
Thank you. If I could ask you then, just to outline then, or provide an overview of the main, you mentioned you can't do work without partners and partnerships. If you could provide an overview of the main partners and stakeholders that SDS works with to support delivery of apprenticeships in Scotland, and obviously we'll come to discuss the relationship with the Scottish Government and in due course.
Yeah, I suppose the greatest, again, the biggest partnership is the Scottish Government. We work very intensely with the Scottish Government sponsorship teams. But the partnership working is very much the employers, the training providers. The training providers we spend a lot of time with, so there's a large number of private training providers out there, and there's a large number of public sector training providers in universities and colleges. So a lot of effort goes into working with those institutions to make sure that they are open, available, and are keen to deliver those apprenticeship programmes. We do work with, on the frameworks and standards side of apprenticeships with the SQA. It's very important that a lot of the work has got to be supported by them and their work programmes. Those are probably the most significant partners that we've got in apprenticeship programmes.
Okay, you've got a list at paragraph 40 that you talk about the other key partners. You've got local authorities with a focus on education and economic development. What sort of partnership working do you have with them, for example?
Yeah, so local authorities, we need the young people to be, or the apprentices themselves to be wanting to do apprenticeship programs. So we spend a lot of time in the school system with our careers advisors, and to support the messaging and marketing and supporting the schools and the local authorities to invest in giving young people the opportunities to participate in apprenticeship programs. And that migrates through to ensuring that the equity, the fairness, the availability of that curriculum is there, so that the learners, the young people typically from school, when they go into apprenticeship programs, get those opportunities to participate in those programs. So local authorities are key. On a foundation apprenticeships, some of the local authorities have a direct delivery model where they support the learners in their local authority area in their schools. So again, they are absolutely key to get on board, and we couldn't do the delivery without them, or they couldn't do it without us.
Thank you. And then the other one that jumps out, which I don't think you've mentioned, is Education Scotland. You've mentioned SQA, but Education Scotland, what is the partnership working there?
Yeah, again, from a strategic point of view, Education Scotland are responsible for the curriculum in the schools in Scotland, along with the delivery with the local authority school teams. And we need Education Scotland. There's been a number of reviews looking at how balanced the Scottish education system is. Apprenticeships are part of the solution, and Education Scotland are very supportive of making sure that the availability of apprenticeships in the school curriculum is there. So again, we work with Education Scotland on making sure that they are part of the opportunity for young people in schools to participate in learning and skills development.
Thank you. And then just one other one that I'd like you to just touch on as well is Job Centre Plus.
Yeah, so there will be opportunities for mutual customers, so people that use Job Centre Plus, to be deemed a good fit for doing apprenticeship training, and we would work with them on making sure that there's a connection between the opportunity and the desire of that customer to participate in apprenticeship programs. And we do get people coming from the job centre type and set up into apprenticeship programs as starters.
So is that a referral? Or
referrals, definitely, yeah. And that might not be, that a lot of those will be more mature individuals that are potentially available to the labour market but not participating, but an apprenticeship programme is the most suitable way of getting them into the labour market, so they will participate in that route. And
which apprenticeship would they traditionally follow? Would that be
modern apprenticeship? Yeah, most people. Yeah, to my knowledge, that will be they wouldn't be doing foundation apprenticeship from the job centre, that's for sure. But they would be modern apprenticeships mainly. Yeah.
Thank you. If we could then move on just to have a look at some of the career services that SDS provides, and in particular, you speak about at paragraphs 26 to 28 the CIAG services and digital channels. Would you please provide an overview about what this is?
Yeah. So career services in Scotland, we've got a large number of staff that provide direct careers information, advice and support in schools, and that's from S1 in the secondary schools up through to the S6, and we've got at the start of every school year we have a school partnership agreement agreed with the leadership team in each school in Scotland, so it's a signed off document, and that supports the service that we will be delivering to the young people in the schools, and that's, we call it the entitlement. Young people have an entitlement from an SDS to receive a specific service. It's a standardised national service that is rolled out across Scotland, but it's very much delivered in a very local way, and the capacity and the volume of that service will be flexed depending on the need of the service in that particular school, and so that's the in-school service.
And just before you move on, Mr. Prentice, are the advisors based in the schools, or do they go in?
They are based in schools.
Based in schools.
So they're not dedicated and exclusive to a particular school necessarily. There are schools that have a dedicated exclusive advisor. Some have two, if they're big schools. But our careers advisors go to schools. Young people do not go and see the careers advisors. The entitlement is that our advisors are in schools. If it's a smaller, more rural school, an advisor might cover 2 or 3 different schools, but there'll be a programme of the careers advisor is in school on a particular day, and we work very much on an appointment-based system. So we do group work delivery, which is requiring a few young people to be in the room with the advisor, but then there's a lot of one-to-one, very specific delivery. That's all appointment-based, arranged with the leadership team and the guidance teachers in schools to make sure that young people have the opportunity to the entitlement that they get from the service that we offer.
And in terms of the advice that they're being provided, it's quite broad, career services. Is that advice specific to apprenticeships, or is it just general career advice?
Sorry, to be very clear, it's advice about all opportunities in the education and skills system in Scotland. It's not just about apprenticeships. So young people will go to college, university, apprenticeships, and into jobs from school. And our advisors support that young person to make that decision. We don't tell them what to do. We guide them, we give them advice, we give them the evidence. We do a lot of work with labour market intelligence, so we look at the opportunities that are available, generic opportunities that are available in the labour market in Scotland at Scottish-wide level. We also post some information down to a more regional and local level, so that young people can understand what the opportunities are in the local environment as well as the national environment, and then they can obviously get more information about the more general opportunities outside Scotland as well. But we'll certainly, from a labour market intelligence point of view, be very give them guidance about what opportunities there are in Scotland particularly.
Thank you. And you also, there's reference to digital channels. Could you please just provide a little bit of insight into that?
We've talked about the careers advisor in the school, and then we've got a website called My World of Work, which is a digital tool which anybody can use. It's not a young person, it's open to anybody to use. And that supports the digital offer around careers, information, advice and guidance. And doing it digitally, you can get to one-to-many a lot easier. And we post up a host of information there about the world of work opportunities, and there's multiple tools on there that young people or all people can use to look at identifying where their strengths and opportunities are, and potentially what job opportunities are up there, what qualifications, what attributes you need to do to progress to your next part of your journey, whatever that might be. So that's all in the digital tool there. We also support that digital and physical offer with telephony type support as well as the contact centre, so that people can phone up and get advice on over the phone as well if they're not wanting to use the digital tool or they need more information that's not available on the digital tool, or they're needing to interpret that. In addition to that, anybody can come in and see an SDS careers advisor that's not based in school, what we call post-school, but again, people in school can come and see a post-school advisor if they'd like to, and that's in the local community, We've got our own SDS centres, but they're becoming less and less. We're mainly embedded within the local communities in employability type hub, local authority hub type setups with like-minded partners, maybe share the same customer, but we can then look after the customer in a more joined up way. So people can engage us in a number of different ways depending on what their need is of SDS.
Thank you. And then just before we move on, also in relation to career services, paragraphs 29 to 32, you talk about targeted support that you offer, particularly S3, post-school, and a service for care experienced. Would you please just explain a little bit about each of those?
So in the school partnership agreement, one part of our service is aimed at people that need the most support, and we work with the schools to determine who those people are on an annual basis, and we then commit our staff to making sure we support those people. So it will be typically at the S3, S4 level, it will be typically young people that have been identified as needing support to stay on in school, or potentially people that have decided that they're going to leave school at a very early age, at the minimum legal age. And then we will support those people to make sure that they are, along with the schools, leadership teams, to make sure that those young people are making informed choices about what they are going to be doing next, and in trying to encourage them to go onto a destination that leads to what we in Scotland is called a positive destination, where it might be going on to a job, or it might be going on to another training opportunity, but one that is hopefully fit for purpose to the needs of that individual, to try and maximise their potential to do what they need to do. And in many cases that's at some stage to try and enter the labour market. So that's a targeted service. So we will support people from S3, S4 through their school in a targeted way. Just under a third of all young people are targeted in some form. Once you're supported, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be supported. It might be that the following year it's deemed that you're on a good trajectory and you don't need to be on that targeted support. What we also do is we support those people in post-school as well. So if you're not going into a positive destination from the school system, then we'll stay with those people on what we call the next step service up to the age of 18 and a half, to make sure that we can be the glue, if you like, that holds their system together, to make sure that where they're going is the right place, and if they come back out of it, we can try and support them to try and make sure they stay in it. We're also for people that are going through in the care system, that we will stay with those people up to the age of 26. So the evidence shows that we are having success in making sure that we support those people, and their opportunities are better as a result of that next step service. So we will support those people as well. So if they're in a positive destination, that's good. When they come back out, we will then target support back into those people to support them again. And we do that with a number of partners. So all this is done with partnership working. It's not just SDS that's doing it. We rely heavily on the leadership teams in the school and the care in the school, but also we do it with third sector organisations and specialist organisations outside schools directly to support these people on that service offer that I've talked about.
Thank you very much. Then I'd like to turn now to look or discuss SDS's role in the governance and delivery of apprenticeships. You discussed this at paragraphs 43 to 51 of your statement, and at paragraph 46 you say that SDS leads procurement and commissioning of learning provision in line with industry demand statements prepared by SDS Skills Planning Team. If I could ask you first, please, to provide an overview of, in the first instance, the role that the Scottish Government has with SDS in relation to this, and then secondly, I'll ask you to come on to discuss the Scottish Funding Council relationship. So if you could please provide first an overview of just the relationship with the Scottish Government.
So Scottish Government and apprenticeships, Scottish Government will, through the letter of guidance that SDS receives, and it's not a surprise, we work with Scottish Government when we get this letter of guidance, and that will stipulate the number of apprenticeship starts that we're to provide on an annual basis. There's also key policy drivers in that letter of guidance as well as to some of the purposes of apprenticeships, to make sure we get a focus on the balance of apprenticeships and making sure that we've got the right participation levels across a diverse group of learners. So there's, if you like, sub-targets in that letter of guidance as to what we're trying to do there. And what we will then do is we will take the labour market intelligence that we've talked about already. So we will have intelligence coming from recruiter job boards, etc., about where the employment opportunities are from an employer point of view. But we'll also then check and balance through the sector skills councils in Scotland. So we work with the employers, their representative groups, and we'll check and balance to make sure that of the 25,000 starts, we get the starts in the right areas to ensure that when we go out there, it's a match and it's not a dismatch. So we'll try and match up the opportunities that we provide via the training providers for starts with the employers' demands, to make sure that then when people are being recruited onto apprenticeship programs, there's a big demand for those spaces. So we try and do that as accurate as possible, and we're also trying to do them in areas where there's an economic benefit for doing that as well. So there's not just replacement job demands going into the more of the traditional jobs, but when there's new opportunities, we're trying to support those new opportunities as well. So we do that.
And how far in, you talked about the intelligence, how far in the future are you sort of predicting?
It's trends, so probably 5 years out, I would suggest on that. Anybody that's, we will try and have a go further out, but the accuracy of the intelligence, the nearer you are to today, is more accurate. So, for instance, we've got very good trends about what the recruitment patterns were in the last 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and it's typically that doesn't change that much in the next 12 months, but when you go to 24 months, 36 months out, there is a trend. Those trends can get disrupted, and we'll come on to it, no doubt. During the COVID period, there was disruption to those trends, but so we will try and predict. But if you look at the shape of the procurement from 1 year to another, there's incremental changes. It's not that significant, but if you take it over a 5-year trend, you might see more significance if you trend back and look at the sectors that are recruiting apprentices, where the real additional demand is for apprenticeship programs.
Thank you. And then also just briefly, the relationship with Scottish Funding Council. So
Scottish Funding Council are key to this across the apprenticeship programme. They fund half the foundation apprenticeships, and they fund the full number of graduate apprenticeship starts. Now we were doing some of this with them, because the foundation and graduate apprenticeship programs started from European Social Fund investments, which we match funded. So we sort of started these things off, but as the European Social Fund was consumed, these had to be mainstreamed. So Scottish Funding Council got more involved in the funding of the foundation and graduate apprenticeship programs. But we've always had a very strong relationship with the delivery, because the colleges and universities, as I've already explained, are significant delivery partners in the apprenticeship programs alongside the private sector. So we have a strong working relationship with Scottish Funding Council.
Thank you. I'd like to now turn to ask you a bit about SDS's role for apprenticeships during the pandemic, which you discuss at paragraphs 66 to 85 of your witness statement. We've spoken a bit about the career services and support already, but if I could start there again in relation to the pandemic. You talk in your witness statement about providing a responsive career service. Could I please ask you to explain a bit more about that and what was happening with your career services, in particular the ones in schools during the pandemic?
Yeah, so we had to go very, very quickly to an online delivery model. It was over a weekend. I've talked about some of the digital enablement we've already had from an SDS perspective in delivering our services. So that was heavily turned on. So the digital, the websites, the contact centre, and the ramping up of the capacity of the contact centre was done over over that period. Now, we have had experiences where we've had to ramp up the contact centre for exam helpline, for instance, where it wasn't an unfamiliar situation to be in, but with the careers advisors in schools going out of school and young people not being in school, we then had to review that service offer I talked about earlier. And the face-to-face wasn't going to happen, physical face-to-face, so we had to try and supplement that with a face-to-face with technology. So Microsoft Teams was one such technology platform. All our staff were fully familiar with that technology platform, and we were able to Teams calls into individuals to provide that one-to-one support. We then started to look at, realistically, group work wasn't going to work in an S1 to S3 situation because the young people were not in school and not necessarily on the technology platforms. And we then changed that one-to-one service offer we talked about for the targeted young people in schools, became a targeted offer for all young people in S4, 5 and 6. So we tried to get to all young people, supported again by the teams, the leadership teams and the teachers in schools, to make sure that young people were supported to the best of our abilities, bearing in mind that they were in a different situation. They were at home. Majority of them would have been at home. Some of them wouldn't have been necessarily have the technology available to them either. So we did have the contact centre that people could phone into, and we were also phoning people as well. So we were doing a mixture of everything, if you can imagine, from a remote basis, with what limitations that we had or our customers had with the technology. I would happily say that from an SDS perspective, we didn't have any limitations from a technology point of view, because all our staff have their own laptops, they have their own access to the Microsoft Teams channels, and they all have their own phones. So from that point of view, we didn't have a problem.
And in terms of uptake, obviously children and young people were in a different situation to normal. What was the uptake? Because you're obviously offering a service, but
we saw an awful lot, a high percentage of people during that time, an extremely high of the targeted. So we were pleased with the levels of engagement that we were still able to maintain in S4, 5 and 6. The engagement did drop off significantly, as the statistics show, in S1, S2, S3, because we weren't doing that group work. But we decided, alongside the leadership teams in schools, that the priority was to make sure, from a careers information advice and guidance point of view, that with the disruption that young people had in schools, that the schools were not necessarily prioritising careers information advice and guidance in S1 to S3, but they wanted the S4, 5 and 6 to be prioritised from a point of view of that one-to-one support, which is what we would have done. And then, where possible, if we could do webinars and stuff with one-to-many, so we could have done a webinar at a school level, but we were also doing webinars to learners of all ages in Scotland, and also teachers, parents and stuff could go onto those webinars and listen to the advice that our careers advisors were talking about. It might be themed, it might not have been, to give people access to careers information advice and guidance through the technology platforms we had.
Thank you. And then at paragraph 70 to 73, we're going to come on to discuss some of the programs and initiatives that SDS was involved in, but if we could perhaps just give an overview of what SDS did in relation to protecting and safeguarding apprenticeships and the apprenticeship system during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I think I'll take each group of apprenticeships separately, if I may, because each one had a slightly different approach. So foundation apprentices in schools, the curriculum, where possible, was maintained online, so they got access to continuing with their learning as best they could. We did have to make some compromises. We worked extremely hard with Scottish Government and the Scottish Funding Council and the SQA, particularly around making sure that we had a way of enabling young people that were on a foundation apprenticeship, even though they couldn't do their formal qualification, that they could get letters of recognition that would allow them to progress through their learning in the school system, rather like compromises that were made on the traditional curriculum, if you like. so that a young person, for example, that was in their sixth doing a foundation apprenticeship, if they wanted to go to college or university, could take that letter of recognition and get that recognised so that they could progress on the next stage of their journey. So we had to get a lot of agreement in place with not just the training providers, but also the people that were potentially going to be recruiting the foundation apprentices, i.e. the universities in this example, or employers, to make sure that was recognised. And we then stayed with every single foundation apprentice, so we supported them to make sure that when they achieved their qualification or their recognition of their qualification, that they then were able to succeed in their desired destination. So again, on a one-to-one basis, our careers advisors were turned on to those foundation apprentices, which we wouldn't have done if it wasn't a pandemic, to make sure they're well looked after, to make sure they go on the next part of the journey. Modern apprentices was a very different situation. By the nature of what they are, they're employed. These people are working in employers. There's a whole different compilation of the shape of what employers were doing at this stage. So some were working business as usual, albeit with severe constraints around how they operated, but the people were in work doing what they needed to do. Our apprentices were in work potentially doing what they needed to be doing, but we did notice, and it was, again, we spoke to an awful lot of employers during this period of time, that a lot of the actual training of apprentices was paused or stopped as a result of the restrictions that employers found themselves under. Some employers were physically shut and were operating from home, as a lot of us would have been. And again, some apprentices were continuing to do their training, but a lot of them, the training was being slowed down or paused, stopped potentially in some cases. So we saw a lot of delays in apprenticeship programme, in the sort of the speed of the learning that was taking place. Now, what I should have said at this on modern apprenticeships is that it's not a forced training program. You don't do it in 2 years, you don't do it in 3 years. It's based on the need of the learner and the training provider and the employer coming together. So if one part of that slows down, then it will have an effect on the speed of the whole system for that trainee. So you can imagine during the COVID period we saw that a lot. So the number of delays to people completing their training was very, very significant. We did put a number of initiatives in place to try and make sure that when things came back up, that the training was again prioritised and accelerated to make sure that was done. Graduate apprenticeships, there was a less of an impact, probably because of the nature of how the learning takes place. The word delays to graduate apprenticeship consumption, and typically I mentioned that there were 4-year programs. So over 4 years, there was potentially ways of catching up within the program. So we did see slowing down, but then we saw a speeding up within the program itself. So we didn't see a significant extension to the length that the trainees went through the graduate training programs at. And again, the employers and the training providers were very good at going and providing the training online, where a lot of the graduate training doesn't necessarily need to be assessed in the workplace as much as the modern apprenticeship would be. And some of the modern apprenticeship programs have to be assessed in the workplace. There's no other way of doing it. And you cannot get around that. And as a result of that, things had to wait until employers came back, training came back up and was prioritised, and then people could complete their on-the-job assessments.
Thank you. Just like to ask you briefly to outline what SDS did to mitigate the labour market impact, if anything. You speak in paragraph 67 to 68 about labour market research and intelligence, which we've already touched on briefly already. Could you please just explain what, if anything, SDS did?
So our industry teams during this period were using all their contacts and connections with their employer base in Scotland to make sure that we understood what within reason we understood, because they sometimes didn't understand what they were doing from one week to another. But primarily, when there was clarity about what employers were doing, we compiled that intelligence, and then we reported on that intelligence and we were reporting that on a monthly basis. So usually we wouldn't have done that as dynamically, but because the situation was quite fluid, we were reporting across a variety of different sectors and different employers within those sectors to try and piece together what the general activity levels were with those employers around skills, training, recruitment, that type of thing. So we could try and understand what it was that they might need and what we might need to provide in the near future to ramp up and support them when things came back to the new norm, whatever that might be. So the intelligence that we put out there, and we have learnt from this, so we haven't gone back to how we used to do it. We still have taken that dynamic approach. We don't do it on a monthly basis now, but on a quarterly basis we use labour market intelligence and what the employers are trying to articulate what they're doing, what we're seeing, the trends, so that we can, the training system, and that's not just the SDS training system, but the colleges, universities and schools can see what's going on out there and be more informed about how they shape up the delivery of curriculum for the learners.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier the discussion about a huge disruption to trends during the pandemic. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I think our biggest concern, as everybody's would have been the sheer impact of what a closed society would have done to everything, really. And I suppose that from an employer perspective, we were really concerned about potentially the exposure that would be given to unemployed people. What would the unemployment levels be like? And we were doing some calculations. SDS provides a service to unemployed people from the point of view that if employers get into difficulties, then we're brought in to provide a PACE support service to support people that are being made redundant. And we were really, really concerned about the impact that and the pressure that might be put on SDS colleagues for providing that basic service, which is a basic service. But part of that is to try and redeploy people into market opportunities. But if the market or certain sectors are shut, then it's going to be very difficult to redeploy people. So we were really concerned about giving people opportunities for training, but also if those opportunities were stopping or pausing, where would those people go? What would they be able to do? And then if the labour market is tight, then the number of training opportunities reduces significantly. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bow wave of people that have not got a decent opportunity to progress. And that causes the whole system significant problems. So during this period of time, we were concerned about people being able to get access to apprenticeship programs. We were concerned about people being made redundant of apprenticeship programs. And then we were really concerned about the number of people that might be made redundant as a result of the system, the employers having to lay off serious numbers of staff. So fortunately, we've made some provision and we came up with one or two programs to try and mitigate that, which were successful. But the government interventions, national UK government and Scottish government interventions around this, particularly the furlough scheme, and the ways that people were supported in work in different innovative ways, made some of our concerns didn't materialise to the degree they could have done. So it was a compilation of a number of things happening that made it a slightly smoother passage than it might have been through the COVID period.
Thank you very much. We could take a break now. I'm about to come on to discuss some of the programs and initiatives which might take slightly longer than up to the hour. So I'm wondering, my lord, would it be convenient? Otherwise, I can break midway through the topic.
No, we'll take 15 minutes now and we'll come back therefore at, shall we say, about 10 past 12?
10 past? That's fine. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Hello, my lord.
Yes, hello, Mrs. Vanderhurst. Ready to start again?
Thank you, yes.
Good. On you go.
Mr. Prentice, I'd like to now turn to discuss some of the programs and initiatives delivered by SDS to protect and safeguard apprenticeships during the pandemic and the impacts that SDS was attempting to address with these programs. You discuss these at paragraphs 86 to 127 of your statement in some detail, so I don't propose to spend too much time on each of those. And paragraphs 88 to 89, you talk about, 88 to about 107, you talk about programs that were, I think, geared at more school leavers or school pupils. I don't propose to dwell on any of those today, but is there anything else, any that you'd like to mention in particular, or anything else in relation to engagement with schools and pupils?
Yeah, with the schools, we've talked about how we were able to change our delivery model to go remote. What we didn't talk about too much was the interaction we had when we came back out of lockdown. That SDS was extremely quick in getting our face-to-face services back up and running in the school environment. So with the support of the Directors of Education and the leadership teams in schools, our careers advisors and our management teams worked very closely together to ensure that where possible SDS got right back in to the schools almost at the same time as the teachers went back into teaching. In most cases it was within probably a week or 2 weeks of the teachers going back in, SDS was back in, the careers advisors were back in the schools. We got fantastic support from the system to be able to do that. We were prioritised as a critical part of that support in the school system, and that was greatly received by our staff. Our staff throughout this period of time were very keen to get back into the face-to-face environment. Whilst we've talked about the success we had in supporting people in S4 to S6 and the one-to-one, we recognised that we needed to get back in and get back to more, get into a rhythm again with what our core service needed to be going forwards. So that was a success story. At the same time, post-school, we were able to do a similar thing with our SDS centres, social distancing the 2 metres. We set up and piloted that very quickly in one Kilmarnock, and then we took the recipe of that and then we rolled that out through the SDS centres. And then again, we worked in partnership with the local authorities and the outreach facilities that we were in to make sure that we could participate in face-to-face 2 metres, 1 metres when the system opened back up again. So that was a particular success story, I think, for our careers teams and post-school teams during this time.
Thank you very much. You talk about at paragraphs 108 to 127 assistance for apprentices and employers and learning providers, and you've got a number of programs there. I'll come on to ask you about maybe 2 or 3 of those, but if you could please, there seem to be quite a lot of schemes. Could you please provide just the background and the context for how those schemes were put in place?
Yeah, so we literally, when we got into the situation where the COVID came along, we worked closely with our government sponsor teams to look at the scenario planning around what might happen in the labour market, what might happen with training providers, what might happen with learning. And we did some scenario planning, and then as a result of that, we from an apprenticeship point of view, we looked at how could we mitigate where possible on those scenarios. We've talked about delays in the apprenticeship programs. That was inevitable. We could see that coming. What we were concerned about was the number of apprentices that could get laid off. So we had an an apprenticeship program. We always had that. So we support any apprentice that's lost their job to try and get into, if they want to try and get into another apprenticeship program. And we've got a good track record in supporting apprentices to do that. So we wanted to put in, and that comes with some funding for the new employer to incentivise them to take on that redundant displaced apprentice. So during this period, we thought, well, we might need more of that. So we again set up an enhanced, a small amount of an enhancement there to make sure that displaced apprentices were encouraged to be taken back on. We did see it in the 2020-21 an increase in the number of people made redundant in modern apprenticeships, but it was relatively small to what we were thinking it might be, and that was all to do with the furlough and all the other things we've talked about. Nevertheless, we were able to use that adopt fund in there. At the same time, we had private training providers that were in a distressed situation from the point of view of cash flow. So all our training and a lot of their revenue streams come on completing their apprenticeship programs and progressing through. That was slowed down, as I've explained. So case by case, we looked at those distressed providers, and if we were reassured that they were making every effort they could do to maintain training and that there would be a high probability that they would be there to pick up the training as COVID restrictions were released. We supported those providers, a small number of those providers, with a small amount of money to make sure that they could progress, that they would still be there to provide training when things came back to normal. So again, that was successful.
Just to be clear, you spoke about enhancing. What you spoke about just now, was that the enhanced adopt an apprentice? Just, my lord, for reference, the one that Mr. Prentice just spoke about previously was at paragraphs 110 to 111 of the witness statement. And what you're talking about now, Mr. Prentice, in terms of funding or assistance to providers, is that the apprenticeship employer grant, which you discussed?
What I've just mentioned there is a grant relief for learning providers.
Grant relief for learning providers.
Which was there to support learning providers that were trying to do training but couldn't do it. We knew they were going to be supporting the training going forwards when they could get back in face to face, and we supported them on their cash flow. But reassuringly, they did what they said they were going to do. That they caught back up with the training. So the money that we advanced, if you like, that they would have received having done the training, they caught back up.
Thank you. And that grant relief for learning providers, my lord, is paragraph 116 to 117 for reference.
And then the other probably the most significant one that we did do, we saw a significant drop-off on apprenticeship starts, and that was inevitable. Again, we predicted that.
Could I just ask you which one you're talking about
the
now?
apprenticeship employer grant.
And that's at paragraph 112 to 115 of your witness statement.
And that what we wanted to do is make sure that the take-up of apprenticeship programs we tried to accelerate the take-up, the onboarding of new apprentices when the restrictions were lifted. We saw there was an appetite for many employers to do this, but if in doubt, can we incentivise more to do it? So the apprenticeship employer grant was put in place, and we saw a rapid acceleration over a 3 or 4 month period of a number of apprenticeship starts that really got us back to, in a further year after restrictions were fully lifted, back onto the norm, the 25,000 starts that I talked about. So again, there was a necessity to do that, we believed, and it was successful, and the number of starts rapidly increased back up to what we usually like to see. So again, and there were 1 or 2 other programs that we had contingencies in place that were used very lightly, but had the worst case scenarios materialised on a scenario planning, we would have had to have used those, we think, a lot more. But fortunately, we didn't have to use them.
Is one of those, for example, you've got apprenticeship transition plan, programme was launched in 2020.
That's correct, yeah.
And I see you've got expenditure of 38,866 and 5 individuals supported, but the facility was there but wasn't required, is that?
That's right.
Okay. Are there any others that you'd like to highlight before we move on? We've obviously got them in your statement and we can take note of those, but any others?
Not particularly, no. I think the significant ones we've talked about, and I think the significant messaging I'd like to get across on apprenticeship programmes is that whilst there were delays, the whole system was organised itself to try and mitigate those delays and trying to accelerate back up and get the consumption of that training back up to speed as and when they could. And and the fact that employers and training providers stayed with the apprentices, I think, was admirable, and made sure that the programme survived COVID.
And then on that note, you've got, starting at paragraphs 128 to 134, you've got a heading, a summary data for each academic year to 2020, going up to 2021-22. Could you please explain what this section is dealing with? And you've obviously got a few tables in there. Are there any trends to note from these tables?
We saw, the most significant trend across all the apprenticeship programs are that we saw a small reduction in the number of people that were able to complete those programs, and the achievement rates dropped slightly, but they dropped pretty well uniformly across the whole portfolio of the apprenticeship program. So we didn't see one particular group of learners being disadvantaged disproportionately to others. There were small variations, but the overall trend was a small drop, and then again things got back up to more of the norm, and numbers came back up. So we saw that in apprenticeship programs, and in the school system, again we saw numbers, for the reasons I've talked about, severely dip, but then they came back up again when we were able to get back to face-to-face.
And this data that you refer to here, it's for each of the types of apprenticeships, and it breaks it down by, is it 16 to 19 is the age group, 20 to 24, 25 plus, and then you've got starts declaring a disability, male starts, female starts, white starts, mixed or multiple Asian, Caribbean or black and other ethnic groups, and redundancies. So is that the data across?
Yeah, it is, and that's the every year we report on the apprenticeship programs. We do an annual report, and that's how we classify all the sub targets in the report, and that's how we report all our management information on apprenticeship programs. So again, that's reflected in the details that we've provided today.
Thank you. We've touched on some of the impacts that you were seeking to mitigate through your programs, but I'd just like to turn to discuss some key impacts on groups or individuals that SDS supports or represents, which you touch on in your statement. And the first one is in relation to participation, which you speak about at paragraphs 155 to 157. Could you please discuss the trends in participation, if any, that were noted by SDS?
Right, yes. So one of the key Scottish Government performance matrix is the participation measure, which tracks the destinations of school leavers. SDS actually coordinates and provides this. We've got a very extensive database which collates information from a number of different sources, but all schools, local authorities, colleges, universities, third sector organisations, comes together in a database where we can track the progression routes of people leaving school. And it's the figures are 91, 92% positive destinations during this COVID period, up to 94%. The numbers have raised slightly, are slightly higher than that now. But during the COVID period, everybody was concerned about the participation measure and what might happen to people not participating in a positive destination. But with all the efforts that we've talked about today, and many, many more efforts that were done by others that I've not mentioned today, the destinations of young people leaving school were not materially affected by the COVID situation. From the point of view of the destinations, what happened when they got to those destinations is not for me to say, other than apprenticeship programs, which I've talked about extensively today. But the actual destination data held up particularly well during that COVID period.
Thank you. And then the other one that you discuss is career and career ambitions, and the impact on young people's career and career ambitions. Could you please explain what the trends, if any, were there, and what the impacts were?
Yeah, in the submission there, we've looked at, we speak to and survey young people about what it is they'd like to do, what it is they've managed to do, and where they'd like to end up, if you like. So we look at their on an annual basis. We actually now scoop it on a more dynamic basis, but we're trying to and determine if the destinations that they're on reflect their ambitions, and we track that over a period of time. And you can see in some of the data sets we provided there that people didn't always get to achieve their destinations for different reasons, or when they got to their destinations, it wasn't what they were expecting it to be. And again, we haven't got the evidence as to why that is, but there's some trends in there that are reflected in our report.
Thank you. If we could now just turn to consider impacts on career management for, in particular, groups with protected characteristics and mature learners. And you discuss groups with protected characteristics at paragraph 163 of your witness statement. Could you please explain what these impacts were and if there were any notable trends?
So what our targeted service does, it looks at the young people that are deemed to need the support the most. And during the COVID period, when we changed our service model from a general delivery group work in S1 to S3, we targeted S4 to S6. So we actually got to many more people as a result of that targeted service, and the numbers reflect that are very good numbers in the fact that we got to the ones that we wanted to target. We got to the majority of those people, and as a result of doing that, we would have by default got to people that needed the support the most, and we were supporting more of them, ironically, during the COVID period than we would have been if we hadn't been targeting everybody. So again, you saw people with protected characteristics and from the most deprived postcodes getting even more support than they would have done if we hadn't been in a COVID situation.
And just on that, obviously that's a success story. What were the reasons for that successful targeting and accessing groups that would not otherwise have received funding?
Simply because we got to more of them, because we took the staff off the one-to-many approach in S1 to S3 and put them onto the targeted approach S4 to S6. So I think that there are some lessons that we've taken from that, and during this period, government were looking at the careers service and careers across the whole education and skills landscape, and had commissioned a number of reports and things, and one of them was to look at a commission around careers itself, which SDS got heavily involved in, and supported some work which is called the Careers Review. And as a result of the Careers Review, there's a number of recommendations that have been made from that, and as a result of that, we're now SDS and others are looking at the recommendations of the Careers Review and actually doing service design, redesign of services, and deploying slightly different services into the whole education skills landscape. SDS has taken those learnings from this COVID period and is looking at how do we target some individuals in a more specific way going forwards as a result of some of the statistics that we were able to, or some of the interventions that we were actually able to deliver during the COVID period. When we had particular success in the one-to-many digital services. So again, how can we repeat that? Because it's a more efficient way of delivering our services. We've only got a finite amount of face-to-face resource that we can have with the careers advisors. So again, there's some learnings that we've been able to take from that for business as usual going forwards, and that certainly has been an upside. We've found out how doing things in a different way has been positive.
And the other group that you talk about in relation to impacts on career management are mature learners at paragraph 164. Could you please explain what the impacts were in relation to mature learners, please?
So again, we were able to focus on those people that were not going to a positive destination. We were able to focus our next step service onto those people, and as a result of that, they got better career management skills, learning outcomes, and we were able to get them into better positive destinations. So we did see some incremental increases in the positive outcomes on the data sets that we've been able to show you today.
Thank you. I think we can then turn, we're making very good time, by the way, so we should be finishing early, my lord. So I think we can spend a bit of time discussing now the impacts on the delivery of apprenticeships. You discuss these starting at paragraph 166. You start with modern apprenticeships, but if we could take them in turn, starting with foundation apprenticeships, which you discuss at paragraphs 180 to 183. If you could please outline the impacts on the delivery of foundation apprenticeships in the first instance, in particular in relation to completion, achievement and redundancies.
So again, I think I talked about that in my earlier part of the statement here, that the impact on foundation apprenticeships, the number of starts we saw held up well, and we were able to, with the modifications we made to the qualifications, we were able to make sure that the young people were able to progress through their learning and achieve their foundation apprenticeship. So we didn't see a disproportionate reaction to, we saw quite a stable level of outcomes for foundation apprenticeships. And
obviously redundancies doesn't apply to them. Modern apprenticeships at paragraph 166 to 175. If you could please outline the impacts on delivery of modern apprenticeships. Again, you've obviously touched on some of this already, but in terms of completion, achievement and redundancies.
So again, I touched on redundancies. The redundancies went up significantly in 2020 to 2021, up to just over 900. They could have been a lot worse. They weren't, and those people, a lot of those people were redeployed. And then the numbers very quickly went back down to the sort of a traditional run rate that we would see on 39,000 people being employed at any given time. We'd see a number of people falling out the system. Other than the fact that the training slowed down significantly and the number of starts was slowed down an awful lot, we've talked about how we mitigated some of that and put interventions in to accelerate the number of starts. We have got a bow wave of people going through training. We still have, where we've got a large number of people that are on training that haven't completed yet, and as a result of less people being taken on in 1 year, we accelerated and took a lot of people on at a quite quick period of time. So we've got some pressure on our consumption, our budget of consumption, if you like. But as far as the outcomes that went for on these was sort of the 72, 73, 74% outcome percentage rate of achievements on modern apprenticeships. So again, we didn't see a dip on the outcomes from modern apprenticeship completions. It was fairly consistent, and graduate level apprenticeships were very consistent. They didn't change at all.
Okay, thank you. And are there any other issues or impacts in relation to the delivery of apprenticeships that you'd like to highlight?
No.
Okay. You have a section in relation to impacts experienced by SDS. I don't propose to spend too much time taking you through that because we have that in your statement, but you cover things such as rapid transition from face-to-face delivery of service, adjusting entitlement to services, maintaining contact with customers who needed the most support, physical distancing regulations, and negotiating access for school careers advisors, which you've touched on already. Yeah. Are there any of those that you would like to highlight, or anything else you'd like to add in relation to impacts experienced by SDS in delivering the services it does?
I think that SDS was particularly pleased with the cooperation and support we had from our staff to try and do the right thing. So all the way through this process, our staff were with us all the way through. The technology platforms that we had worked really well. They supported our desire to get back in front of our customers as quickly as possible. The system round SDS staff in schools that we've talked about and in our outreach, in local authority outreach, was very, very good. We were heavily prioritised and recognised as being a key part of the customer journey, of their customer journey, our customer journey, and we were actively encouraged to get back to the new norm, whatever that might be, as soon as possible. So that was particularly good. I think the support that we had from our training provider community and apprenticeship programs was exemplary. We didn't have significant problems with encouraging them to do the right thing and support apprentices. The employer base was remarkable. Again, a lot of the employers of apprenticeships or apprentices in Scotland are employers of less than 250 people. 85% plus are what we call small employers, and they stuck with their apprentices all the way through this process. We didn't see large numbers of redundancies, so the SDS teams were well supported from the point of view of making sure that we had the information, the tools to make the best judgments on what it is that we should be doing. And all the way through this process, we were heavily involved with our government sponsor team, and they were extremely supportive of everything that we were trying to do. Obviously, we were trying to do everything that we could to make sure that their end-to-end processes through the whole education skills system was as good as it could be. And I think that the work that we did jointly with the Scottish Government, sponsor team and SDS made sure that the services that SDS was responsible for delivering were as good as they could be in the circumstances.
Thank you. Mr. Prentice, then, just finally, it's not in your statement, but just to give you an opportunity to articulate any potential lessons to be learned, positive or negative, or, as a consequence of positive or negative impacts or experiences, things that the Scottish Government ought to do again or differently in future.
I think the engagement we had through the whole process was good. You could always look back and say that one or two things could be done quicker. SDS, from a planning perspective, you could look back and say that we planned to do quite a few things that weren't really needed, but if things had panned out differently, with for instance, a furlough scheme that wasn't there, and we had a lot more displacement, then some of those things would have been needed. We certainly looked at the things that we did, and said if we went through this process again, what would we do more of? So we've built that into our contingency plans going forwards. And I think the most significant thing that SDS has taken out of this from the careers review recommendations is to look at how do we deliver our services in a more joined up approach with physical and digital enabled technologies. So allowing customers to engage with SDS in a different way going forwards. Now, we've always done this, but this has given us another way of looking at this, which we have been doing, and we're actively doing at the moment, so that we can engage with customers in a different way going forwards. We can also use new tools and techniques to deliver things in a more efficient way on apprenticeship programs. Again, SDS has been doing a lot of, and the way that we work, the way our staff works now is different to when it was pre-pandemic. So we've got a more blended approach as to how our staff work on the daily life of an SDS staff member is slightly different. I think it's a more efficient way of working now, and we're certainly looking at how that can enable us to deliver our services in a more efficient way going forwards. We are not consuming as much money now in our estates, so the physical buildings that we had to support our administration staff, so non-customer facing staff, we've taken a lot of learnings from the COVID period in that respect, and it's enabled us to reduce our costs quite significantly in our estates, buildings costs going forwards. We're doing a lot more now with sharing premises with our partners, and as a result of doing that, the customer journey, which is the most important thing, is becoming a smoother customer journey, and more partners are together. We talked about DWP, SDS being together, co-located means that some of the customers that we jointly work with, the referral process is go and see that person across the way there, or I'll walk you across to the other desk and we'll have a discussion about your career opportunities or what have you. So some of the things in that space has become is a lot more efficient, and we're learning from that all the time. So there's been a few learnings there. It has reinforced as well the contingency plans that we had in place. We didn't plan for a pandemic, but we've planned for severe cyber outages and disruption to physical premises and stuff. So we got all that at once on the premises side. So it did reinforce some of our disaster recovery plans. We tweaked them, made them better, and again that will stand us in good stead should we have something hopefully not as serious as the COVID pandemic. But again, if we get business interruption activities now, it's none of it's easy, but it's not as difficult as it might have been pre-COVID, because we're a lot more resilient to how we deal with these things going forwards. So I think those are the main learnings I would take out, or we would take out of this experience.
Thank you very much. My Lord, I don't have any more questions for Mr. Prentice unless your Lordship has.
Nope, I've got nothing to add or ask. Yes, thank you, Mr. Prentice. Thank you, Miss van der Westhausen, and well done finishing early. We'll come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.